So today I'm joined by a super special guest, Dylan.
Hey, I wouldn't say super special.
I think you're super special, and I think that there are millions of other people who would say you're super special.
Well, that is cool to hear.
We are missing one medic, but that's okay.
Yeah.
We did meet with John previously. So really, we're just going over this story that kind of blew up in a really random, unintentional way of when I called 911 on myself in a mental health crisis, and you were the one who responded and John responded. And this story took off in a way that I couldn't have anticipated, and I don't think it was one that I knew so many people needed to hear. So some backstory, I don't think I've actually told you like what happened leading up to you guys receiving this call.
I remember you having, only because I went back and reread my report.
Yeah.
And I remember you had mentioning that you were coming back from Seattle because you had just...
Oh, you do? Okay.
Because you had just finished a counseling session.
I didn't know that I even told you that. I guess I
Yeah.
just don't remember so much of this.
And which is pretty common when anyone has like some sort of mental crisis, whether it's psychosis or something, is like there's like this blackout phase almost, or like disassociation where you don't remember everything. So that could be why you don't remember telling me that.
Probably. Because I was going to say, I was coming home from a therapy session that day, and I was panicking while driving, and I don't know how much I disclosed to you guys when I made that call about like there was a bridge overpass. There was a lot of intention, but I'm honestly not sure how honest I was with you guys about that.
I remember you mentioning that. And so the dispatch actually came out as a anxiety call.
Oh, okay.
So when we get a call, we hear the tones, and then it tells us the address. Mm-hmm. And then while we're responding, our dispatch will come up and give us what we call a short report. And it'll be like 25-year-old female having anxiety. Mm-hmm. You'll find her in a pink Volvo or whatever at the parking lot, with the hazards on. And they give us as much detail as they can. And so it doesn't, sometimes they get it wrong just because the patient doesn't always say it correctly, right? And so it came in as anxiety. And so John and I, when we were responding, are just more concerned about, okay, what are we going to do to help calm this patient down? Mm-hmm. But as we were talking, so the way we operate on aid cars and medic units, so John and I weren't paramedics at the time. We were both just EMTs. And then within the last few years, we both took a promotional test and became paramedics. But we operate similarly, where one person's lead on calls and one person is skills. And what we mean by skills is whoever's lead is talking to the patient, basically being like Sherlock Holmes and figuring out what the issue is at hand, whether it's a medical issue, trauma, or mental crisis. And so I was lead, John was skills, and so he was checking like your blood pressure, heart rate, and things like that, and kind of standing back, being observant. I think at one point he probably went and checked your car just to see if there's anything that maybe there was drug paraphernalia or alcohol, anything like that, because we're trying to figure out what is at hand. And then I remember you alluding to trying to harm yourself, and you said something about a bridge, and then that's where I just basically asked the question, do you have an intention to harm yourself or kill yourself? And then you opened up at that point, and then the call went from anxiety to now a suicidal ideation with plan and potential attempt. Mm-hmm. And that's where gears kind of have to shift.
Right. So when it started getting to the point where we were like, okay, we have to take you to the hospital, there was a point where I was cooperative.
Correct.
There was a point where I was not. So how do you handle situations? Let's say if I right off the bat was like, absolutely not, you can't make me. What is the standard protocol for you guys?
So back then it was different. Back then, if you had intention to harm yourself or someone else, we can get PD involved, and they would do what's called an involuntary commit. And so because you have intention to harm yourself and we want to prevent that, we would call PD out and say, hey, she's suicidal, has this plan, and kind of give them the thing. They would fill out a form. They would give it to us. We would put you in the back of our aid car and then transport you to the hospital. And then we would give that form to the hospital and say, yep, she's suicidal. She has this plan. And then I believe it was a 72-hour hold that they would do for a psych evaluation. And then Washington and Montana are like one of the only two states in the country where a social worker, or I believe it's a psychologist, are the only ones that can actually keep you. So even if a doc is like, yo, yeah, you definitely need to be held, I don't think that will hold. However, now people can actually refuse help even if they are suicidal. I don't know exactly how restrained the cops are.
Something that stuck out to me when I spoke with you guys earlier was John was talking about how in the moment that you guys got to me, he explained that he had a choice of, you know, whether you guys wanted to take your time and just approach this as it was, or like some paramedics maybe would have been like, okay, she's not listening, she's not being cooperative, let's call the police, because they're the ones who can kind of bring me in per se. Can you just tell me a little bit about like what that experience was like, or what your insights were for that and deciding maybe not to go that route?
Yeah, when sometimes it's pretty obvious, like patients who are adamant, like, nope, you're not going to do anything, give us the finger, you know, and then we're like, all right, well, if you want to do this the hard way, we have to get PD involved. Again, that was back then. I don't know what the situations would be like now, depending on how aggressive patients are. But when patients were cooperative and like you could tell they just wanted help, a lot of patients were willing to go with us. And so we didn't have to get that involuntary commit form filled out for us to transport. We could just kind of convince people to come with us. And that's the thing with like mental health calls, is that it's not an objective thing that we can go and fix. Like when someone gets hit by a car, we know, okay, we're going to do whatever interventions we need to fix this individual. Like it's hands-on, whereas mental health is not. It has to be patient. It has to be, you have to come to their level and basically just talk with them, right? And every mental health crisis is going to be different for each person, right? And it's different for person to person, as well as like whenever one individual has one mental health crisis, it's probably different from the last time they had one. You were cooperative enough that we were just talking, right? We were just sitting on the curb and we were just hanging out, and I'm trying to metaphorically talk you off the ledge, you know? And when you initially said, I'm not going to go, we did request PD just because you had already conveyed to us, yeah, I have intention to hurt myself. However, as you got more cooperative and we're like, yep, you relented and were willing to come with us, we just canceled PD. And we're like, yep, you guys don't need to come.
Let's talk about in the ambulance.
Oh, yeah. So
fun moment.
I didn't remember that at all until I read that report, and I called up John. I was like, yo, John, do you remember this call? He's like, oh, totally. And so.
Well, he was the one driving, right?
He was driving.
Okay.
So you and I were sitting in the back. Usually whoever's lead stays with the patient in the back. We're just cruising to the hospital. And for those who don't know, we don't always drive with lights and sirens. Usually to the call, we will. And if the patient's what we call stable or not critical, we'll drive to the hospital without lights and sirens because there's no need, right? And so we're just kind of cruising to the hospital, nonchalant. We're hanging out, talking in the back. And usually to kind of ease tension, I'll start asking patients about, you know, their life. You know, for older people, I'll be like, hey, do you have any grandkids? Are they in the area? Things like that. I think with you'd mentioned you had a son. And so we were probably talking about that. But you were still in this like mentation of anxiety with intention, and you had a lot of worries and concerns, which were genuine because you were thinking about your son, your husband at the time, and I think it was your mother-in-law or maybe your mom, I don't know who, but you animated to the point where you were just unbuckling your seatbelt and trying to like grab anything. And I remember at one point you grabbed some scissors that were sitting there, and I had like chucked them across the thing. I was like, hey, I'm trying to like talk with you. And then at that point when you were starting to be more aggressive, I kind of gave John like the, hey, let's kick this up a notch there, dude. And so he turned on the lights and sirens, and thankfully we were already close to the hospital. I was like pinning you down to the stretcher so you wouldn't just bolt. And he ran inside to get security's help, and then we restrained you to our gurney, took you in, and then you kind of calmed down again. And we don't restrain too many people, but it does happen, people who are unruly and things like that. Sometimes we know right away, okay, we have to restrain this person.
Mm-hmm. I know it looks one way for me, but I know being the responder and being the one to have to actually do it is probably like a little different. How does that, like, do those instances like impact you? I mean, because I feel like putting restraints on someone, that's something you got to have some sort of mental like toughness to be able to do. I'm sure it's not an easy task.
It depends on the patient, right? Because
I'm not Superman over here with these like massive muscles, but
right, you were super easy because like I was just kind of like holding you until John got back, and then but you were calm. There's other patients who are these giant people who can like throw me across the room with one arm, or there's someone who is like spitting at us, and that's where I'm like, ugh,
That's when it gets a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes you gotta get down and dirty, and I don't know how other responders act, but like when I'm on a call, and I'm pretty good at checking out of like my emotions at that point, because we just have to.
Right. You have to kind of make that separation.
Totally. Especially with pediatrics. That's where like lots of people kind of get this gridlock and just kind of be like, okay, this is a kid. Sick kid calls are the ones that make people like have PTSD and really dwell on things. So when we have to deal with someone else's mental health crisis, like restraining someone, it's usually not as emotional for us, I would say, unless someone like can tie that into their own personal life. Like we've gone on hangings before, of like a 12-year-old kid, and someone has a 12-year-old kid and can like see their kid in that patient, or maybe they know someone in their family who hung themselves, and it just kind of triggers intrusive thoughts.
How do you kind of handle those calls that are really difficult?
Everyone's different, but we're fortunate that the department we work for is really good at what we call critical incident stress debriefing. And sometimes that happens right after a call. I went on a 12-year-old kid who was crushed by a lawnmower, and we did everything that we could. And it was really emotional for everyone afterwards because the kid was well known in the community. But as a paramedic, we have what's called the MSO, and they're a paramedic that oversees all of us paramedics. And they come on all the super critical calls with us typically. And he was there, and afterwards, like the first thing he did was come up to me and was like, hey, Dylan, you did a great job. But besides that, if you need to go home, if you need to check out, take time off, whatever, let's make that happen. The department's really good at making sure that your mental health is where it needs to be. Because if it's not, then it's going to affect our patient care. Our department actually recently hired a MHP, mental health professional. I think that's what the P stands for. Practitioner. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Make up a P word.
I'm sure it's right. I'm sure you're right.
And they're available for us to talk to as well. And we also have something called peer support, where you can talk to people who have been trained to help talk with people in their mental health crisis. And there's just been a huge shift within the fire service within the last, I want to say like five-ish years, maybe longer. It's so much so that even suicide was recently added to the line of duty death like cause, which just shows you how much people are impacted in this job. And there's lots of people who will retire early or quit because, you can only see like a 3-year-old kid run over by a car so many times, or a teenager hang themselves, or whatever it may be, before you're like, all right, I need to step back, I'm done,
Yeah,
But
I remember when I spoke at that conference in DC, you know, one of the things that they really intentionally wanted me to speak about was the mental health of like first responders and how seriously like that needs to be taken, you know, through the past few years, like reluctancy that first responders might have, kind of, you know, being in that caretaker role, being the person who's always responding to the emergencies, responding to mental health calls or whatever it may be, and feeling that reluctance to like maybe not make those calls for yourself or kind of take it as seriously for yourself because you are just used to being that person, right? The person on call who has to be the one to respond to someone else and maybe not yourself.
yeah, and that is a good point. So not only do we have that good professional side of it where, hey, these are all your options, but they also encourage it outside too. Like our MHP gives you a list of tons of different available resources to do when you're off duty. And that's also super important because like when I go home, I can't just talk to my wife and be like, oh yeah, I held another dead baby, you know, but I'll be cool in like 10 minutes. You have to separate that because I can't like vent to my wife and her understand that. So we have to check ourselves and make sure that we do that in the right capacity. Otherwise it's not going to be beneficial to both us and our families. Everyone handles things differently, you know, like we talk about stress in general. Because with mental health, like I was saying, it's not an objective thing where like you fall down, you get a scrape. People say, oh, just rub some dirt in it, you know, which is fine because that will heal. But like you can't just like rub dirt in your mind, you know,
Right.
just call it good.
Yeah.
For me, I have my faith. And so that's one of my avenues to help get rid of this stress and these intrusive thoughts. For a lot of first responders, it definitely was for me before I had kids. Like if I had a pediatric call, I was like, cool, this is just like, it's just another call. I don't have like any ties or anything like that. But now that I have kids, I'm like, I have like these anxieties, you know, like what if that happens to my kid? Or like, what if, you know, something that I've seen affects my family or happens to my family? And I'm like, how am I going to handle that, you know? And that's why they really encourage counseling nowadays for all of us. It used to be like, you don't need to do that. Just push those feelings down. You're good.
Right.
You know,
Right.
you can only push them down for so long before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm glad that you guys have some sort of resource because I know that you guys have a job that is really taxing, and also you guys don't get to see a lot of the outcomes of your calls. Is that right?
So we get a kickback from, by kickback I mean like what the diagnosis is, but not necessarily how the patient did in the hospital. So cardiac arrests, like when someone's dead, we do CPR, and if we get them back, we'll oftentimes get the outcome for those because they're critical.
Right.
And they want to report that back because they document the outcomes of those things. However, a lot of the patients will just be like, oh yeah, this patient had sepsis, and then it doesn't, like, we don't hear anything about how they did unless they die. And that's like the bad thing. You'll be like, oh cool, I got a patient outcome. You click on that patient, and then you'll be like, oh, they did have whatever I thought it was, you know, like maybe it was a heart attack. You're like, okay, cool. We brought them to the hospital. Hopefully they got the report. And then at the end it'll say like, oh, expired because something happened or they couldn't get them back. And you're like, oh, that's unfortunate. And so we get a lot more negatives because like someone expiring is like, that's definitive. Whereas you don't know what's going to happen after they get discharged.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no paper trail following them at that point.
How often do you hear about positive outcomes?
It varies. As paramedics, we have a medical director, and we all operate under his license, and he reviews all of our calls that we go on. And sometimes he'll fill us in sometimes, like, hey, this patient was having a big head bleed, good catch. She's going to make a full recovery. And it's like, okay, that's cool. Mm-hmm. And those are like, all right, we did a good job. But It depends because he's super busy and there's a lot of paramedics and there's a lot of calls that go on. So you might not hear anything, even if you're like really curious about like a patient. So sometimes we'll call the hospital and say, hey, how did this patient turn out?
So some questions that I received: what do I do if I feel like I'm in crisis and I need immediate intervention, but I'm having fears about calling maybe the authorities, the paramedics, whatever that looks like? What would you say to someone who asked that?
I think a lot of people who do have like those fears have like this picture of like the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes.
But, you know, we're like, oh, we're going to show up and throw a straitjacket on them and just haul them off to some sort of asylum or whatever. But that's not the case. Nowadays, people call all the time and then we show up and they don't need help, even if it's not in a mental health crisis, right? Let's say it's a little old lady who's having chest pain and they're like, oh yeah, I was having this. And then we show up and we take care of them, do our thing. And then they're like, well, I actually don't want to go. And we're like, that's okay. You don't have to. You can always call back too. So if you are having some sort of crisis, I believe that you should call, because the EMTs will show up. They're going to interview you. Hopefully they treat you really well and are patient and understanding. And maybe they can convince you like, yeah, let's go get some help. Or maybe you're like, I don't want help. And then they say, that's fine, you know, but you can always call back. 911 is free.
It's a free number.
It is a free number.
Yeah, I know that a lot of fear that people have around calling for help in a crisis situation. And I know it's like different from state to state, but sometimes if someone, maybe like something like a welfare check, or if someone called themselves or someone else called, sometimes, I'm actually not sure, but sometimes like paramedics show up and sometimes police show up. So do you know what creates like that distinction between who shows up to a call?
So dispatch is usually the one that does that. So a welfare check, you're probably going to get both police and fire. If it's someone who is a threat to themselves or someone else, then a lot of times we're supposed to wait for PD to show up and make sure it's a safe scene for us. Because some people will be like, call 911 like, hey, my sister is suicidal. She has a gun. That's clearly not going to be a safe environment for us to go in. Just be like, hey, we're here to take your gun, you know, like, no. So that's why we have PD going, because they'll go in and clear the scene and then they'll let us know, hey, you guys can come in, evaluate the patient. I don't think police will be able to involve you like they used to. So if you're worried about that call, PD might still show up, especially if you say like, I'm suicidal, but you'll also get aid. I'm
curious, you know, hearing back from me and hearing about everything, all of this. What has your takeaway been from learning about it? I don't know if you know like John's thoughts on it.
It's funny because like you're right. I couldn't have dreamed of this. I wouldn't have thought this. Like a lot of people when they become firefighters are like, oh yeah, I want to like kick down doors, save babies, and then, you know, be the hero that way. Yeah. But in the fire service, 90 to 95% of what we do is EMS. And so even on the EMT basic level, like everything is important that we do. And it just like this shows you that advocating for a patient is always going to be the best thing, you know, and you don't know how much you're going to impact someone just based off of like that one interaction, right? Because in my mind, like I would have never guessed that the patient that I had to restrain and hold down, and while my partner is tying her arms down to the gurney, is going to like completely 180 her life and just thrive, you know? And that's what we hope happens, but we don't really think about those often, because after we clear that call, we go to the next one and we're like, all right, let's save this person in whatever capacity they need, you know? And so it's just a good reminder that those non-critical calls can be a game changer in someone's life.
I feel like that really basic human to human interaction, which is so often like what people need, especially those who are having something like mental health related. A lot of times they're just like, I just need someone to like be a human and see me. And sometimes it is something that like that maybe we perceive as small and insignificant, but ends up being this like really, really significant thing for them.
Totally. And it's funny because I have a mentor. His name is Skip. I don't like to give him credit for stuff, but I will. He always said, like, anyone can ask a patient questions and like check off this list and figure out what's going on. You can have a really high IQ and figure out that, sure, they're having whatever medical problem. But if you don't have a good EQ, you're not going to be able to connect with that patient and comfort them in the time that they need, right? Whether it's for a mental health crisis or like someone who is shot, you still have to show compassion and empathy to that person who's writhing around on the ground, while still doing the objective thing of taking care of those wounds and making sure you're doing everything you can. So Skip always said like the people who care about their patients are usually the best paramedics or EMTs or firefighters, whatever you want to call them. And it just shows that when you care about patients, that you'll get the job done. Not every time, but
you'll do your best.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is you're going to do the best that you can for the patient and be the best advocate for them.
So what kind of got you interested in this field and wanting to do that kind of work? I'm sorry, that might be a loaded question.
No, you're good. So I was a senior in high school and I was like 2 weeks from graduating and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't even apply for colleges. I was like, whatever.
Yeah.
And I went on this mission trip to the Philippines and we were building a hospital over there. And one of the pastors said to me, like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. I just don't want to sit in a cubicle and I just want to be able to take care of my family in the future and whatever may be. And he's like, well, have you thought about a job in the fire service? He's like, you care about people. You like working with your hands. You like constant change. You don't like sitting around. And it's blue collar work that is different every day. Like every call is different. Sometimes we get like the same call for the same person for the same reason. But most of the time it's different. Every call that I went on this last shift was totally different. When I joined the fire service, I was like 18 years old, right out of high school. Got an internship and doing all this stuff. And it's funny because I actually didn't want anything to do with EMS. I didn't want...
Really?
I didn't. I was like, when I found out that I had to be an EMT, I was like, man, that sucks. I was like, I just want to like fight fires and like, just cut open roofs and cars and stuff and jump out of airplanes behind fires. And I had delusions of grandeur. But then like when I went through EMT, I loved it. I loved learning about the body, and plus it's 90% of what we do. And so that's actually what drove me to become a paramedic, because I love being in the back of the aid car or the medic unit with these critical patients and doing what we can to save them and make a difference, and hopefully a positive outcome.
So I really only have one more question.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I do have an audience of younger people who struggle, but I also, after this story coming out, I kind of have a little bit of a first responder following as well now. So I'm curious what advice maybe you would give to first responders who either maybe are just starting out, haven't had a lot of experience with like maybe mental health calls. What would your advice be to another first responder kind of in regards to how to navigate getting a crisis call like that?
Anytime you get some sort of mental crisis call, I think patience is probably like the biggest key in dealing with these patients, especially if they're cooperative, right? Because we don't want to amp them up any more than they already are, because we don't want to make mountains out of molehills. Mental health crisis is not like I was saying, it's not an objective thing where I can just like put a Band-Aid on you and be like, you are healed, and so patients, talking with them, and empathy is like the biggest thing. Like the more that you interact with people, the better you'll be at that. As far as like taking care of your own mental health, when you're at work, be at work, do the work things. That's awesome. But when you leave, check out. Because I made the mistake. I shouldn't say it was a mistake. It's just like a thing. You know, when I first got in the job, I was like, yes, I'm a firefighter. I'm so cool. This is awesome. Everyone look at me. And I would like follow all the things on Facebook or Instagram or whatever that were fire related. And it's like, I don't need to do that. I see enough of that while I'm at work. I'm at work for a third of my life, you know, with my schedule. I live with these people. I see these things, and I don't need to bring that home.
I feel like that separation would be really important, especially when you're dealing with like, I mean, your job is hard, and you have to have kind of like a space where you're not constantly in that.
Right.
All the time. Even if you brought it home, for example, I'm sure that like burnout is just
Oh yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
Well, those are all the questions, but I do want to open it up if you have questions.
I do think it's really cool what you've done, and the fact that you do have this following and that you are making this impact and taking like what was a negative point in your life and then have completely just flipped everything. And like I mentioned earlier, you're not only thriving, but you're helping others to do the same. And I think those instances, like if you've had some sort of instance where you've interacted with EMTs or paramedics or whatever, and it was a positive experience, let them know, because that's cool. We enjoy hearing those stories, even if you're just like, hey, thanks for coming out and helping my mom, or thanks for whatever, you know. That's always really appreciated, and to see like someone take that, like what you've done, and create this awesome environment. Good for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It as much as it's unexpected, I think for you guys to hear, it's also something that has been unexpected for me to experience.
Oh, I bet.
I did not kind of go out seeking to do this. It fell into my lap in a very random but kind of perfect way. And I think that, you know, definitely as first responders, it's really important to hear those wins. Anytime
you can hear a win, not even just in like as a first responder, but in life.
Any
right?
wins.
Right? Any win.
Take the wins.
I am curious. Turning your life around, do you still see counseling, and like, are you personally medicated? And
so I go to therapy every week.
Good.
I think I've been in therapy for like 12 years, and I honestly don't see myself not going, even if I'm like not actively struggling.
Right.
I think like for me, it's a way of like maintenance, like maintaining my wellness and having someone to like bounce things off of. So yes, also medicated. What's funny is actually after that incident, I went in and did like a PHP, IOP program, and I actually got 2 different diagnoses there. So doing all the things to kind of maintain what I've kind of built since that moment.
Good. I think that's awesome. The reason I ask is just because I think it's important for people who do have mental health issues that if they are supposed to be taking these medications or are supposed to be seeking counseling and therapy, then they should be doing those things and like making this game plan to continue to do those. So I think that's awesome that you're doing both of those, because I think it's also important that people hear that you are doing those things, because there is a stigma for some reason of like taking medication or going to therapy. People are like, oh, you need to be medicated, and you're like, yes, I do. You know?
I mean, a lot of people do these days.
Oh yeah,
like more so than not.
Yeah, it's true. And then I think everyone should do some sort of therapy. You know, whether it's like, maybe it's not a thing that you do forever, but you know, go and talk to someone about an issue that you're having, and then see how they can help guide you through that. And then maybe you just have like one instance of trauma that you need to work through, and it takes you 6 months to do, like, to be able to cope with it now. And then maybe you revisit therapy again later when it starts bothering you again or whatever.
Right. Yeah, so. No, it's totally something that I think if anyone has healing to do in any capacity, like, it's one of those things that's really good for processing through it. And then I think what's really interesting with what you said about the med thing is that's so common. And I know I've experienced it. I still like have periods where I'm like, I'm great. Like, I'm good. I don't like, and I'll get a little, like, I'll start slacking on my meds, or I'll start slacking with my therapy appointments, and then things get bad, and I'm like, what the...
Yeah.
Why? And then I'm like, oh yeah, because I was doing these things to like make sure that didn't happen.
Yes.
And that's such like, so many people struggle with that, because they have this like feeling of like, I'm good. And then they kind of slow down on the self-care stuff, and then it like comes right back.
Yeah. And then when you fall, you fall hard.
Yep.
This is like the most serious I've had to be for like an extended period of time.
Really?
So, oh yeah. I'm not good at being like, I'm known for being kind of a clown. And so like people were actually concerned when I went to medic school, like, is Dylan going to be okay?
Are you
like,
going to be all right?
Like, will he function? Will he come back as a paramedic, or will he fail out because he doesn't know how to shut up? And
well, you like, I never would have assumed that you were like a jokester, because you do turn it on and off when you're at work. I saw that firsthand. I was like, cool, got some like serious professional EMTs with me here.
Totally. It's funny because when you went to the station, and Matt was the paramedic who you kind of relayed all this information to, when he went and looked up the call, he looked up your name to see who was on that call. He was like, Dylan did this? like
really?
Like, what? So that is key. Like I love to have fun, and I like to joke around, but I like to be able to turn on my game face when it's time to like to do what we need to, you know. I haven't had to go to HR yet.
Yeah. Knock on wood. Well, thank you for coming out and chatting, and I think this is a conversation that a lot of people are really going to appreciate.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Keep doing what you're doing, because I think that's awesome.
And you too. You're doing some big work over there as well.
Nah.